I might be in trouble. I will most assuredly have some questions to answer, but right now, I just want to get it all down while it's fresh. I don't want to convince myself that something else happened by the time the police get here, because if I think too hard about it, I know I will. I want to remember it all clearly, because I know what I saw, and I'm not going to backtrack on it. I'm an insurance adjuster by day, but when the weather changes and it gets a little chilly out, I like to fancy myself a hunter. It's an old habit from when I was a kid, something I usually do to remember my dad, and I've gone every year to Harper's Woods since I was about 9 years old. I remember fondly the times when I would sit in Dad's old tree stand, full of anticipation that was as unlikely to be rewarded as it was to be sated with a buck or a fat doe. Dad had a half dozen of them hanging in his study, and I remember the 8-pointer that he would always point to whenever he was a little drunk and crow over it, like it was the biggest deer in the known world. You could never bag such a magnificent animal, Kenneth, not if your life depended on it. Dad had been dead for 5 years, but I think I was still chasing that deer that would prove him wrong. I was in the old stand that we had always used, a stand that I was sure other people used when we weren't around. When we were in town, however, it seemed to be our sole providence. We would set up here for hours, and even though we didn't always get a deer, we went home with meat more often than we didn't. It wasn't as popular as some of the big hunting reserves in the area, or even the people who salted their stretches of land for maximum deer output. But it was very private and away from the noise of the road and the presence of other hunters, and I'd always liked it. I don't think I'd ever seen another human being out here other than Dad when we went hunting, and to me, it was a chance to get away from the city and return to nature for a little while. When you spend all your time in a cubicle, it's sometimes nice to get away from that noise. I had upgraded the stand recently, something Dad probably wouldn't have approved of. I'd gone and got one of those really nice camouflage tents that you see at the Bass Pro Shop, those professional stands you can sit in relative comfort while you wait for your deer to wander by. I'd been sitting up here for almost 2 hours with my John Grisham novel and a thermos of coffee, enjoying the sounds of the birds and the general ambience of the woods. I'd seen 4 deer today, but none of them were big enough to shoot. 2 of them had been doe, who looked like they hadn't given birth to their first fawn yet, and the other 2 were a small buck with a fawn that looked smaller than my collie dog back at home. I had let them all go, seeing them through binoculars as opposed to the sight of my gun. Sometimes I bring my Nikon camera out here and get some really nice pictures, but I hadn't thought to bring it this time. I was really hoping to bring home a deer so I could have it butchered and enjoy the venison through the winter. So when I saw the buck come out during mid-afternoon, I knew I had found the one I was looking for. He was massive. He would have put Dad's 8-pointer to shame, and the chest on him made me groan at the thought of carrying him out of the woods. It was 1.5 miles to my truck, and this fellow looked like he weighed an upwards of 500 pounds. Still, this was the one I'd been waiting for all these years. This was the one that was going to silence my dad, as he reminded me that I'd never get a deer as big as the one he had brought home. Carefully, oh so carefully, I set down my binoculars and picked up my rifle. It was nothing fancy, just an old bolt action that my dad had given me before I went to college, but it was one of my favorite hunting rifles. I sighted through the scope, watching as he dropped his head to graze, and as I put my tongue between my teeth, he turned suddenly and looked back at the woods. I cursed silently, sure that I was about to lose him, but instead, he bent back down and continued eating. I lined up my shot, wanting to hit him square so I didn't damage the meat too badly. I didn't hang trophy heads in my house the way that Dad had, but if I'd been so inclined, this fellow would have been going into my living room. As I chose the shot, he looked up from the grass and seemed to see me for half a second. We made eye contact through the scope. My brain was sure that he was about to bolt, but instead he went right on grazing as I slipped my finger over the trigger. Then, without warning, something came behind it as the oblivious deer kept eating. It was something terrible, something I wouldn't have believed if I wasn't looking at it through the scope of my rifle. I thought it was a wolf at first, maybe a wolf that had been injured or tripped into some nuclear waste. He was about twice as big as any wolf had a right to be, and the longer I looked at him through that shaking rifle scope, the more I came to believe it might be 3 times as big. His fur bulged in odd places, his head was strangely elongated, and he didn't crawl right. Watching him move was like watching some kid pretend to be a wolf, and it was more unsettling than the creature itself. Despite how oddly it moved and looked, it seemed to be utterly silent as it went about its business. The deer had no idea it was being stalked, and seemed to be placidly eating as if its life was not in immediate danger. I thought about cracking off a warning shot, just so the deer wouldn't get eaten by this thing. But my hands were shaking too badly for me to even think about sighting properly. Also, and this was the weirdest part, I did not want that creature to realize that I was here, if it didn't already. I know how that sounds, a guy with a gun worried about some animal knowing that he was here, but the sight of it was just so unnerving that I couldn't get the thought out of my head. I'd always had a deep sort of fear about being eaten by a wild animal or another person, and just seeing this thing made all the old fears come back again. I just knew that if this creature got its teeth into me, they would never find anything but skin and bones, and maybe not even that. I was helpless to do anything but watch as it came within a hair's breadth of the creature before jumping on it and begin to maul it. The deer seemed to be as surprised as I was, and even though it attempted to flee, there was nowhere to go. The creature had it dead to rights, and all either of us could do was watch it happen. It tore into the deer like it hadn't eaten in days, and the field was spattered with blood. I found myself wishing that I'd taken the shot. This creature didn't deserve to die like that. No creature deserved to die like that, and as I watched it devour the majestic buck that I'd been planning to kill myself, I became irrationally angry. What right did this creature have to take what I'd been planning to kill? He had no right, no more right than I had had, and I found my aim getting a little steadier as I sighted down and put the scope on the misshapen thing. Just as the deer had, it suddenly turned its head and looked at me through the sight of the rifle, and I almost missed my shot all over again. In that second, I could swear that the creature could see me, but I steadied my hands and lined it up as those piss-yellow eyes looked at me through the sight of my gun. It seemed to be daring me to shoot, maybe even begging me to, and finally, I pulled the trigger and obliged him. The shot hit him dead center of the forehead, not a shot I could have ever made again. As the creature fell down, I sat back in the stand and felt my hands shaking. I'd killed it. I had done that, but I wasn't sure it brought me any joy to do so. I'd killed it out of anger, not out of any real desire to kill it, and I steeled myself as I put my rifle down and picked up the pistol that I sometimes brought with me. I didn't really want to go down there and see it, but I realized that I had to. I had to go down and see this creature, even if no one was ever going to believe it had actually existed. If I went down and it wasn't there, then I'd be able to tell myself that it had just been a fluke, something I'd seen out of the corner of my eye and made too much out of. I was almost hoping for that, the creature not being real. It would have been a mercy, but whether I wanted to or not, I knew I had to go see it. My mind wouldn't be satisfied with what I had done until I went and laid eyes on the beast and made sure that it was dead. I thought I was going to fall out of the tree stand a couple of times on my way down, but somehow I managed to make it to the ground, and that was where I found the last thing I expected to. Lying in the field were two corpses. One was the majestic body of the deer, its flesh torn and its eyes staring at the sky, as if to ask why this had happened. The head was still perfectly intact, not a bit of flesh destroyed or disturbed. It was as if the creature had severed the head cleanly and left it for later. If I wanted to take it and put it on my wall, I would have been able to do so easily. I remember seeing myself reflected in those perfect shoe-button eyes and feeling a sense of dread run through me as I moved to look at the other thing that I had killed. The second corpse was not that of a monster wolf, but of a man. He wasn't an impressive man. No brute that I had mistaken for a wolf, but an old man in the late stages of life. He was naked, his modesty covered by a nest of steely gray hair, and the longer I looked at him, the sicker I became. He had a perfect hole in the middle of his forehead, his face still dripping with blood, and there was no question that he had been what I had seen. He was sprawled out on the ground, spread eagle, they would have called it, and his own eyes were looking up at the sky, just like the deer's had. His face seemed almost thankful, like I had done him some kind of great favor by killing him. And I remember my hands shaking as they held the gun that I'd been prepared to shoot the creature with if it wasn't dead. I had to slide that gun into my pocket as I looked at him, because I was really afraid that if I looked at him for very much longer, there'd be 3 corpses in the field, as opposed to 2. I called the police because I didn't know what else to do. I told them there had been a hunting accident, and that I'd accidentally shot some feral old man, and now I needed them to come and get the body, and probably take me to jail. The town where my hunting lease is small, barely 1,200 people, but the sheriff seemed very interested in getting out here, so that he could get the body and ask me some questions. That was about 20 minutes ago, and I haven't been sure of what else to do except write this up so that there's some account of why I saw fit to shoot a half-naked old man who was out in the field that day. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination or some kind of deer fever, as my father used to call it, but I have no explanation for what I've done today. Dad used to say that was why he had this hunting lease so far out in the woods. He would say that when a man is hunting, sometimes he'll slip into a state of deer fever, where another hunter or a rock or a barn or anything that slips into a man's peripheral vision will become the deer that he's longing to see. He told me once, as we sat around a campfire and he cracked open his 4th or 5th beer, that sometimes when a man is intent on bringing home a kill, he sees all kinds of things that aren't there. Your cousin Herschel is doing 10 years in prison because when he was 20, he shot a man while he was out hunting. He swears up and down that the man was a buck, a big buck in fact, and that the man came about later. He swears this, son, but I went with his aunt to see the man he shot. He was in an orange safety vest. He had a hat with a stripe on it, and he was dressed like no deer I'd ever seen. When I went to talk to your cousin and ask him how he could have mistaken a man in such garb for a deer, he told me that he'd seen it, plain as day, and he would say so before the judgment seat of God, if that was what it required. He still says it to this day, and I believe him. Be sure of what you're shooting at before you pull that trigger, boy, because it might change your life in ways that you haven't even thought about yet. I understand Cousin Herschel's dilemma now, though it may be too late to do me any good. I'll have a lot of questions to answer once the sheriff gets here. I know some of them are likely to be hard questions, but I hope to God that he's an understanding man. I know what I saw, and it wasn't any deer fever. These are old woods and sometimes contain strange things. I just hope that when the sheriff gets here and sees the old fella, maybe he has more answers than I do.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.